All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome, Special Families. This is Crystal Sanford, your host of Thriving Special Families. I'm also your Autism and IEP advocate in California. I'm so happy to be here for another episode of our podcast. And today we have our special guest, a special education attorney, Carly Christopher Esquire. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Crystal. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here today. It's just an honor to have you. So thank you for your time.
Of course.
So I want to properly introduce Carly. And again, parents, if you're watching us live, feel free to add your questions to the chat or comment section, and we'll do our best to answer those today. Our topic today is compensatory education. So without further ado, let me introduce Carly. She previously worked as a behavioral consultant and behavior therapist for a variety of non-public agencies in California, and she served students with autism as well as emotional disturbance, both in the home and the school settings. In addition, she developed behavior plans with educators and parents with a focus on positive reinforcement systems. During her years in law school, she was a clerk for Disability Rights California, formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. And following law school, and Wolfell, a firm specializing in special education litigation. So Carly's worked in over 75 school districts throughout California, and we are very happy to have her here. She's also guest lectured at Touro University in San Francisco, State University, and for agencies supporting people with disabilities, such as support for families of children with disabilities in San Francisco. And so Carly now is practicing serving families in San Diego, but as well as, I'm sure, families throughout California. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, we just recently relocated our practice from San Francisco to San Diego to be closer to family because I also have 3 young children. But we have routinely represented children throughout California. We have had clients in San Diego County, and we're excited to get more as we expand our practice in Southern California.
Well, great. I want to say, unfortunately, you're probably going to have lots of cases here in San Diego County because at times there are challenges that parents have in their IEP process. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. One of the ways that you can help families, which is compensatory education. Oh, and we already have a question. Let me start with this question. Here we go. So here, Suarez's question is, when is the best time, date-wise, to request compensatory education in the form of educational therapy? Would it be now or in the spring? And I think she's in reference to we're in distance learning now, seeing some challenges, and so what would be the best time to request that compensatory education? But before we get started with that, maybe you can just help us frame the idea of compensatory education, Carly. What is that for families who may not be aware?
Yeah, so when a student is denied a FAPE, which is the legal standard that applies to students that have IEPs, a FAPE encompasses a free and appropriate public education, with the buzzword there being appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at a child's unique needs, we look, are they being provided with specialized academic services and supports to meet their individual needs to make progress in light of their unique circumstances? That standard of FAPE has recently improved for students with disabilities, which is great. What case law is now interpreting is a Andrew F. standard that applies, that is a Supreme Court case that was recently decided a few years ago that improved the standard for students with disabilities. It's no longer just they're going to make some progress or it's the floor of opportunity. We've now increased that standard so that we're looking at the child's unique needs and ensuring that they have services and supports to meet those unique needs. Now, that relates to compensatory education. Many parents and educators are seeing currently under the current orders and with the pandemic that we're living in, that students with disabilities have been offered distance learning plans through their school district that are abbreviated or amended versions of their IEPs. Some districts are calling those distance learning plans. Other districts are just issuing prior written notices. That a letter or a statement issued from the school district saying, we're going to change your students' services and this is why. We're seeing both distance learning plans being issued and prior written notices. Now, what's happening in many districts and with many clients that I serve is those agreements that are being offered by the school districts are not comprehensive. They don't cover all of the students' needs. They're a big deviation or variation of what they were receiving in their previous IEP, and the student is struggling. And so what I'm telling parents is districts, many districts in my practice I'm observing are pushing parents to sign that distance learning plan, sign that prior written notice. I want to see consent that you're in agreement. You as a parent always have the right to provide consent with exceptions. That means you can say, I am agreeing to this plan so that my student gets something, because something is sometimes better than nothing, but
Right.
it's not fate for my student. And that is important because that's setting the record that you're in disagreement and you want to ask for, either currently or prospectively, for compensatory education. And that was the question that was posed. When do I ask for that compensatory education if my student has been denied a FAPE? My answer to that is you need to start the discussion now. Send those emails to your administration. Tell them you have concerns about the current programming. Sign the distance learning plan or the prior written notice. If you have already signed it, it's okay. Just continue to preserve those concerns via email or in written communication to the district. What I would do is I would request an IEP meeting which the district legally has to hold within 30 days, and I would make a formal request for compensatory education. Now, I think the question is being posed when, because perhaps when is the service going to be more available for my student? You reach an agreement of compensatory education with the district now and preserve some hours or save some hours for them to be implemented when things become more open or accessible for students. Right now, with the pandemic, things are a bit of a moving target. Although I like to advise my families, which districts typically are not providing this information, that there are services that are still being implemented in a one-to-one safe format. Those include behavioral services from a non-public agency, therapeutic services, some occupational and speech therapy, psychological services. I like to notify parents of that because there are options to receive those services if you're comfortable with that in a one-to-one format, in a safe format now, as opposed to waiting until another time or a later time.
And that's really great information because, as you said, unfortunately, a lot of parents are not being made aware of this by school districts. And so what I'm hearing you say is that in private settings, there are services that are being made available to students, even though they may not be provided on a one-to-one basis in the school area. And so it's not too early to start looking into the compensatory services even now.
Correct.
And Suarez says exactly that she's seeing that happen even now in the private practice, which is exactly true. And for parents who are just joining us, welcome again to another episode of Thrive in Special Families. I'm your host, Crystal Sanford, your autism and IEP advocate in California. And we have our special guest today, Carly Christopher, Esquire, special education attorney in California. And if you have questions, please feel free to add those if you're watching live to the comment section, and we'll do our best to answer those today. Also, the disclaimer I need to let you know is that this is for informational purposes in our podcast, and that is being shared should be construed as medical or legal advice. For more specific information for your case, please do contact a specialist in that area. So we just dived in, Carly, right away to compensatory education. And I think it's because families are at the point now that they've given the district the benefit of the doubt, they've given them opportunity, and they're still seeing their child struggle. And I think at this point now, we're seeing parents start to consider compensatory education.
Yes, it's such an important discussion because even outside of the pandemic, many parents aren't aware of what compensatory education is. So even outside of the pandemic, if your student is being denied a FAPE or has not been offered the services to meet their unique needs and allow them to make progress, then you might have an argument that they have been denied a FAPE. And when we're looking at that denial of FAPE, we then would request compensatory education to pay the student back for the lost time. Sometimes this is very hard to do in practice because we have had students in my experience who have been out of school for, let's say, a year because they've been restrained or secluded or been, offered an environment that's not safe for them, and they haven't even been in a school setting. It's really hard to pay a student back for a year of lost education. But what we do in my practice is we really individualize that compensatory education to look at, okay, where's the greatest deficit? Where's the need? And how can we address that by way of private, very data-driven, evidence-based services? Maybe not going to get the student exactly back where they would have been had they not lost that time, but it will give them a good foundation to continue their education in an environment that's going to be safe and effective.
And that's great too. Thanks for sharing that and clarifying, because parents might think, well, I want tip for tap. I want exactly the amount of hours that they have over this time period, be it during school closure or not. But what you're saying is we want to give something that is feasible to help the child begin to make progress.
Correct. And we're always looking at those IEP goals to guide us, right? IEP goals are so important. They should be covering all areas of need. They should be data-driven. We should have clear baselines and clear objectives, and they should be quantifiable, because we want a real measurement tool of progress, and we want to ensure that we're addressing areas of need. And we use those goals as an example, even now during the pandemic, when we're looking at compensatory education. Look at those goals. Is your student making progress towards those goals that have been consented to? Many parents are coming to us and saying the goals aren't even being addressed in any format. Perhaps they're not having the access to the special educators or the professionals in the various domains of speech and or behavior. So the goals aren't even being targeted at all. So that's a big concern. And that's one you would bring up to your IEP team to start a discussion about compensatory education.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for this valuable information. We have a question here from Casey regarding compensatory education. Who maintains the service logs and minutes for IEP? Can these services be provided during extended year? And she adds, for example, a student was not serviced since kindergarten for OT and is now in 3rd grade. What's the maximum of compensatory education a child would be entitled to? Great question.
That's great. That's great, Casey. Thank you for the question. Pursuant to law, both state and federal law, the districts are mandated to keep service logs of when a student receives services and for the frequency and the duration of the service. The reason why that is in place is for checks and balances to ensure that this was actually delivered. Sometimes our clients or our students or our children are unable to communicate to us if they participated in a speech session that day, or an OT session that day, or an ABA session that day. So as a parent, you have the right to collect educational documents from the school district. They have 5 business days to provide you those documentations. In that request, in that written request, you ask for service logs. If you do not receive service logs, you confirm with them, is this the case where there are no service logs? And if their answer is yes, then you already have a really good basis for an argument that compensatory education is due because the student did not receive something likely that they were supposed to receive. Perhaps the district's position is going to be, well, we provided the service, we just didn't log it. They would have a hard time overcoming that barrier in a hearing if it were to go in front of a judge. If they were not being credible with their presentation of the frequency and the duration and when the service was being provided. So if you have, and yes, to the ESY question, service log should also be kept during ESY. If you have a student that there are no service logs and you know that the student was not receiving service, that would be a discussion for, to initiate a compensatory education discussion and to request services. How much they would get, again, sometimes a judge does not award minute for minute. So if the student was receiving 60 minutes a week of service, sometimes they're not going to be awarded that exact amount. However, sometimes they will. So it really is a case-by-case basis on when the facts are analyzed and the details of the facts are considered and determined in making that decision. In my experience, if your student's IEP, let's say, says 60 minutes a week of OT, and you have proof that this was not happening, then I would write a letter saying my student hasn't received services from this date to this date, and now you owe them compensatory education in this amount. Typically, districts are very receptive to that because if you get an attorney involved, it's to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. Is there, Carly, a statute of limitations? Because in this case, the parent is saying from kindergarten to third grade. Is she able to consider the entire time, or is there a time consideration?
Yes, thank you for that question. So in special education law, there's a 2-year statute of limitations. So you can go back from this date to 2 years prior to look at the violations that might have occurred and request compensatory education based on those violations. However, there are exceptions to the statute of limitation. Many of those exceptions are around, did the district misrepresent something to you, and did you rely on that misrepresentation to your detriment? That is one of the exceptions. So perhaps the parent in some circumstance was told the service was provided. It's then, years later, 3 years later, and the parent discovers that was in fact incorrect. Mm-hmm. That would be an avenue to expand the statute of limitations beyond 2 years.
Okay, wow. So there are those potential exceptions there.
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, right now we want to give a shout out to our sponsor. Thank you to Not Just for Nannies, the Special Caregiver Family Manual. If you're a family with a child with unique needs and you find yourself to be away from your child, you might be concerned, thinking that no one would be able to know your child's routine and how would they be able to give your child the best care possible. Well, with the Special Caregivers Manual, you're able to document your child's special interests, that they like, things that you're working on regarding strategies, behavior, all those great things. And you can turn that to your caregiver so that your child continues to receive excellent care in your absence. So again, that is the Not Just for Nannies Special Caregiver Manual. I've used it and it works wonders. Pick up your copy on Amazon. Again, we're back with Carly Christopher, our special education attorney here in serving the California area, and we're having a riveting discussion about compensatory education. Thank you so much. Carly, we have another question.
Yes.
Can you go straight to due process and skip the IEP process in requesting compensatory education?
Yes, there's no requirement that you make the request for compensatory education in an IEP. However, I always advise my clients, before you hire an attorney or perhaps file for due process on your own or with the assistance of an advocate, make sure the district knows what the problem is. So whether that be by way of writing a letter, sending an email, having an IEP meeting, which is audio recorded and on the record, state your concerns. Because one thing that a judge oftentimes analyzes is, was the district aware of this problem? Typically, in my experience, when parents come to me, they have already that established record of expressing concerns, trying to work with the district, trying to be collaborative, and not being able to reach the outcome that's necessary for the student. But there is no legal requirement that you ask for comp ed in an IEP. Yes, you can file for due process. You can also file for mediation only, which is a service available through the Office of Administrative Hearings, typically a non-attorney forum where two parties are in disagreement, that would be the parent and the school district, and Office of Administrative Hearings assigns an administrative law judge who is a certified judge through the court that oversees and tries to work out these differences or disagreements with the two parties in order to reach some type of mediated agreement.
Mm-hmm. So you do have several options. And I talk to families about that when I teach my monthly IEP course, is that you have several options in resolving your disagreements, as simple as attempting to address that at the IEP table, but up to and including due process. But there are some avenues in between, like you said, just mediation
Yes.
only. Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Carly, what tips do you have for families who are right now in distance learning? What I've told families is you need to be able to document, like you said, document. So important. Taking videos of your child and their reading, or documenting tally marks of their attention and how much they can do independently versus with adult assistance. Letting the team see your child, turn the camera off, and be okay with that. And I know that doesn't always sit well with families, but we have to let the team know what we're challenged with and what we're struggling with, I think, in order to help set the stage for that request. Would you agree?
Absolutely, Crystal. I think it's such an important time for parents to utilize all those tools, like logging in a journal, what they're observing, even if it's just a jotted sentence. What did you observe today? I mean, if you have the opportunity and it's something that's possible, probe some of those goals. If one of your students' goals is that they identify, expressively the alphabet, sit down and probe them and see, is that something that they're able to do? For you to have that bit of data is so important for you to take to the IEP team. Oftentimes, or I should say sometimes, when I sit in IEP meetings, I hear subjective information about what a student is doing or isn't doing. And so we do rely on data, and data can be what you're observing on a daily basis as far as your student, their emotional presentation. What are they telling you? How do they feel? Are they isolating more? What are the tantrums? What do the outbursts look like? How long are those lasting? Jot all that information down, because the reality is we're in a crisis right now, and students that have disabilities are more vulnerable to the issues that come up when we are being denied access to education. We know general education students are struggling as well, and we're not minimizing or denying that. But what we're observing as practitioners in my field is students with disabilities are even more vulnerable to some of the complications that are arising because of the pandemic. And those go into many different aspects: equity issues, socioeconomic, healthcare. They're all overlapping. And I think what we're seeing is there is going to be a need for compensatory education, and that need is now. We need to be very thoughtful on how we plan for our students' programming in order to give them some foundation when we retransition students who have been out of a brick and mortar school, because many students still are, into a brick and mortar school, and what that transition is going to look like.
We have another question for Carly. Our county prefers in-person tutoring assessments and cohorts, but what if her specific school district not agree to that? Denial of faith and thus compensable? That's a great question, because there are times where children are being allowed on campus to help to stop the loss for our most vulnerable students. But unfortunately, and I'm seeing this in my practice, that not all students who are most vulnerable are getting access to that. So what would be your response?
Yeah, so regarding the waivers, I think this is touching on some districts have applied for waivers and others have not.
Mm-hmm.
There are still, outside of the waiver discussion for, allowing students, let's say, to come back onto campus, regardless of what tier that county is in. This goes this follows Governor Newsom's tiered system and other systems that have been in place that are complicated for even me to follow as a practitioner as far as where we are and where we're going. And I understand the pandemic is ever changing, but I'm advising clients that despite those waivers for public agencies to provide service, there are private service providers that are able to go into the home right now and provide service to student. Is that the same as a student attending school? No, of course it's not. But I'm advising parents to really look into those opportunities and discuss those opportunities with the school district about individual private services if it's not an option to go back into a school setting. Of course, that doesn't address the issue of socialization and peer access, but it can address some of the academic and emotional components and some of the other domains that a student might need service in.
Mm-hmm. So if a student is given access to these appointment-based services, phase one, what they're referring to, essentially could be, and we can show that this child just doesn't learn well via Zoom, this potentially be a space for compensatory education request.
Yes, and Crystal, you bring up an important factor. Some districts are implementing their own policy on what is required in order for a student to get particular services. Mm-hmm. So things like that's only provided right now to mod severe students, or services only for people that are severely impaired. I'm using the example of a one-to-one trained aide in the home. One thing that I'm advising parents, and remember this if you take anything from this session, there's been no waiver of state and federal law as it applies to special education during the pandemic. Your student still has their rights. And the biggest right that your student has is that their IEP be individualized to meet their needs. So if you're hearing rhetoric like only the really disabled kids, quote unquote, which is in itself discriminatory, would get this service, that's inaccurate.
I've heard in line with that is that this student can't come back to our campus for phase one because they won't wear a mask, or this student can't come back because they can't stay within 6 foot distance, and so we're not giving them access beyond the campus. So again, another piece that is discriminatory and I think compensable.
Absolutely. And Disability Rights California, I almost forgot the name of the agency, even though I used to work with them, is a statewide agency that really looks into some of these bigger issues that can impact the disability community as a whole. Mask wearing is one of them, and they've issued some really good research on and information and guidance for schools that not all students are going to be able to wear a mask because of sensory issues, because of medical issues, because of breathing issues. And also, not all students understand the 6 foot requirement because of pragmatic, social, cognitive delays. And to deny a student involvement in a school setting when other students are getting access in itself is discriminatory, because those are things that relate to their disability and they need to be accommodated.
Definitely. One other question in regards to outside San Diego County. I know we talked about your services span throughout California. A question here is that in Los Angeles, they're not allowing one-to-one aides into the home, even if parents agree. Can you speak to that?
Yes, so there has been some recent litigation at the state and federal level regarding LAUSD students, because USD has had some issues complying with IEPs, implementing distance learning plans, making sure that students are getting distance learning plans. I can't speak specifically to this fact. I would have to research it a bit more, but I would say on an individual basis, you have to present your students' needs to the IEP team, maintain and preserve what is necessary. And even if that's not being granted right now by the district for some, let's say, policy reason or some individual restriction or, internal policy, I would maintain that, because you still potentially have a case to move forward and advocate for those services outside of the IEP forum. But on that note, I do want to make, I am acknowledging that that is already being litigated in the state and federal level, and I don't have outcomes to share with you at this time as far as what a judge is considering or ruling on those issues.
And that was going to be one of my other questions for you, Carly, is that what are you seeing in your practice now? What cases are you seeing coming up in regards to distance learning or compensatory education?
Yeah, I'm seeing two things that are pretty significant. One, students with mental health needs that have depression and anxiety, those symptoms are presenting as increased and are exacerbating, and it's concerning the amount of isolation and what services they need that aren't available right now. So for instance, not all of my students can participate in virtual therapy for a variety of reasons. And how do they get access to those services? So I'm seeing that as a big concern. And now we're seeing even more students presenting with symptoms of depression because of the situation that we're living in right now. The other thing that I'm seeing that I think many parents can relate to is, am I as a parent supposed to maintain my own occupation, take care of the children, be the therapist, the social worker, the speech therapist, the teacher, the one-to-one aide, the behaviorist? How is that feasible and how is that sustainable? And a lot of parents are coming to me and saying, hey, I'm trying the best that I can, I'm involved, but there's only so much I can do, and my student is not making progress. They're unable to engage in the virtual sessions, to maintain the transitions between sessions, and to still feel okay about themselves. What I'm seeing in my practice is a lot of requests for one-to-one trained aides, and I have been successful in obtaining those in the home setting if the family's comfortable with someone coming into the home. We've also been able to secure funding for, let's say, residential treatment facilities or boarding-like schools if the student is now, if it's now a safety issue where there's a harm to self or others concern. So I'm seeing those two issues being faced with the most. But in addition to that, I have students that have dyslexia that are just not getting the, systematic interventions that they need in order to receive an appropriate education, and they're regressing. So I'm seeing a variety of issues. And what I always tell parents is, state your concerns, put those concerns in writing to the school district, advocate for your student at the IEP level. And if you need assistance, call me. I routinely mediate agreements with districts that parents are able to obtain services that they didn't even know were an option for students that have IEPs.
That's wonderful. We're very happy and glad to have you here in our county, San Diego, being a resource to families in that way. Carly, if there was one thing that you would want to give as a piece of advice for families right now, what would that be?
I think that goes back to, don't sign your distance learning plan or consent to a prior written notice if you're in disagreement to it. So remember, just like in an IEP, you have the right to say, I'm in agreement for you to implement, but I do not think that this is fate. I have concerns that my student is being denied an appropriate program. Parent, that's such a powerful tool. Not to say that if you consent to it, you can't later ask for compensatory education. You absolutely can. But it's such a powerful tool to remind parents, everything that you're handed, you don't have to consent to, even if you're really being pushed hard to do so.
That is so important, and as I teach classes to families over the years, that's one of the big things I try to share with them is that you have power, you have a host of rights under IDEA, and one of them is consent. And be it partial consent or not, you really have that right to understand what you're signing, regardless to if people, like you said, are pushing the signature page when we were meeting in person, right? They're just pushing that signature page in front of you and expecting you to sign right in the midst of it. I mean, I don't even do that for my own child. I have a child on the spectrum, and I don't sign her IEP meeting the day of. We just had our meeting, and I just told them, well, I'm sorry that you were under that impression. I'm not going to be signing today, because that is our right to understand, interpret it, and then share specifically what we do consent and do not consent to.
Yes. And one other tip, read the IEP notes. If it's not a comprehensive of the discussion that took place, for instance, if it omits your concerns, if it omits things that you came up, that you challenged the district on and said, I don't agree with that. I don't see progress in that area. I don't think that that's accurate. Make sure those IEP notes are read and respond with a parent addendum. You respond with a copy of an outline of the meeting written by yourself. So you know that if this was to be evaluated later to see, oh, well, the parent just agreed with everything in the notes and everything in the IEP, you have to say, I didn't agree. I have these notes that I drafted myself because there were errors and omissions in the notes presented by the school team. And sometimes that's just because, you know, we're going through the meeting quickly and information, it's a concise, you know, document. It doesn't have every line that was transcribed per se through the meeting, but sometimes big things are missed, like parent concerns. We want to make sure that that's captured.
And something that I encourage families to do is to create a parent input statement that really outlines in a short paragraph what your specific concerns are for this school year. And I encourage them to add that every year to their child's IEP. Ask the team to either add it to the parent concern section in the IEP or as an addendum, attaching it to the IEP. And then as their child gets older, pulling the child in and getting their input as to what their goals are for the year. Sure that that is added to the IEP and that's clearly explained to the team, and letting that help to drive the plan for the child annually.
That's a phenomenal idea. I love that.
Thank you. So, you know what? This has been such a wonderful conversation. We could stay for an hour and talk about compensatory education, but I know that so many families are struggling now, and so I just really value your time and giving us some of your information around this topic, Carly.
Of course, and thank you for the work that you do, Crystal. If anyone has any additional questions or would like a free consultation, my name is Carly Christopher. I'm a special education practice. My office is currently in Oceanside, California. You can text or call me. My phone number is 562-544-6077, or you can email me at cc@specialedcollaboration.net.
That's awesome. That was the next question. How can parents get in touch with you? So thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Families, if you also are in need of a way to document, early in the pandemic, I created a distance learning documentation log so that you can use that to jot down all these notes and keep it in one concise place. So if you look like a copy of that, feel free to let me know in the messages or in the comment section, and I can email that to you so that you can keep your documentation all in one place in regards to distance learning. So again, this is Sanford, your host of Thriving Special Families. Our guest today has been Carly Christopher Esquire, special education attorney in California. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.